The winning blueprint presents.
In the Lab Room.
The views and opinions shared on this program are that of Louis T. and In the Lab Room alone and should be taken exactly as they are given. If you are soft, easily offended, or can't listen to the criticism of your team, this program is not intended for you. This is pure, unadulterated football talk for the hardcore fan. Viewer discretion is advised. You've been warned. Well, we're back with the lab reports. You're in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me. Here to talk about the Washington Redskins in today's lab report. And the Redskins were able to accomplish something that they haven't accomplished since 1999. NFC East champions. But it's going to be a hard feat to repeat. The Redskins have some things that they have to work on, have some things that are strengths that got them to that point as NFC East champions. Let's talk about those strengths that they will try to carry into 2013 as they try to make that pilgrimage back to the top of the NFC East and maybe a bit further into the postseason. Now, the first strength you think of, you think Mike Shanahan, you think Washington Redskins, you think Mike Shanahan, you think running the football. And the Redskins absolutely pounded the rock in 2012, and that's a strength, pounding the rock, running the football. This Washington Redskins team absolutely ran the football in 2012, and if there was nothing else that the Redskins could do and nothing else you could count on from the Redskins, it was that they were going to run the football. And the Redskins led the league, statistically had the best rushing total in the National Football League, led the league in rushing, and of course, most of that is in part to the two rookie tandem of Alfred Morris and Robert Griffin III. These guys burst onto the scene, and maybe you expected that from Robert Griffin III, but you didn't expect Alfred Morris to just burst onto the scene the way he did. He was magnificent in 2012, and the Redskins are hoping that he can duplicate what he was able to bring to the table in 2012 in 2013. And you also look at 22 rushing touchdowns for the Redskins. Second in the NFL, Robert Griffin III, Alfred Morris once again were the catalysts there. Those guys really found their way to the end zone once they got in the red zone. Once they got inside the 10, it was hard to keep this Redskins team out of the end zone because of that dual threat. You didn't know if Alfred Morris was going to be the one to get it in, or you didn't know if Robert Griffin III was going to stick it in that belly, pull it out, and quarterback draw it, or run the read option. It was just tough to stop this Redskins offense around the goal line because of the different features of this offense and the different ways they could get the football into the end zone. And so Redskins 22 rushing touchdowns and also 16 runs of plus 20 yards in the NFL. And if you can run the football and get chunks, it demoralizes the defense. It does something to you mentally when you're getting pounded on the ground and you can't stop the opposing team from running the football, where the Redskins were getting chunks last year. 16 runs of plus 20 yardage, and that's fourth in the league. Anytime you can get chunk plays, you're doing yourself some good. It's hard to put together 13 play, 82-yard drives in this league without having something go wrong. The more chunk plays you can have on a drive, the more likely it is you're going to get into the end zone because you take away the element of the mistake. You're less likely to make a mistake if you're getting chunk plays, because if a drive is 5 plays, well, you just lowered the likelihood of you committing a penalty. Whereas if it's a 13-play drive, you gave yourself more opportunities to have a holding call, to have a procedure call, to slow down your drive and maybe even bring it to a halt at some point. And so chunk plays are huge. Redskins were able to do that in the running game in 2012. You look at another strength for this Washington Redskins team, and it was the fact that they were explosive offensively. This is a team that before 2012, ask a Redskins fan when's the last time they put up 40 points. You'd be hard pressed to find a fan that could give you the exact date. Ask them when the last time they scored 30. You'd be hard pressed to probably figure that one out as well. You'd probably have to think for a little while. The Redskins were a team that didn't score a lot of points. They'd eke out 19 to 17 victories, or they'd lose games 24 to 17. The Redskins were almost allergic to scoring 20 points at one point in time. Well, not in 2012. The Redskins came out of the gate in that season opener on the road against New Orleans with a 40-point performance, and they never looked back in this season. Redskins averaged 27.2 points per game, fourth in the NFL. So this offense was extremely explosive. They also led the league in yards per play, 6.2 yards per play. So essentially what that says is that every 2 plays the Redskins were gaining first downs. And again, this goes back to those chunk plays. Anytime you can get chunk plays, you put a lot of pressure on the defense and you allow yourself to minimize the opportunities to make mistakes. And so the Redskins got chunk plays. And I tell you what, it's funny that I talk about mistakes. We'll talk about those here in a second, but this is a testament to just how good this offense was and how off balance it had opposing defenses. In 2012, Redskins 6.2 yards per play, best in the league. You also look at 5th overall in offense in the league, and that's not a small feat that goes unnoticed in Washington. Again, this is a team that normally is one of the worst teams offensively, and in 2012, with the additions of Robert Griffin III, Pierre Garçon, Alfred Morris, and some of the other guys that were brought on board, this offense turned around, and they turned around quickly, and it helped drive this Redskins football team to that 10-6 mark, winning the NFC East. So you look at another strength for the Redskins, 3rd in the league in turnover differential. And I tell you what, for as bad as this passing defense was for the Washington Redskins, you have to find a way to offset how bad the Redskins were historically bad. And we'll talk about that here in a second when we get to the weaknesses. But they were historically bad with their pass defense. And so in order to offset that, and I talked about that with several other teams earlier on, you got to be able to do something to overcome the fact that you can't stop the pass. And for the Redskins, the great equalizer was the turnover. And the Redskins were able to force turnovers in 2012 in abundance. And they were forcing them in drones. And that's the only way the Redskins were able to survive early in this season. Later on, the Redskins' passing defense got better over time. But early on in this season, they were getting scorched, but they were able to force 21 interceptions. They were able to force 14 fumbles and recover them. And so the Redskins were able to overcome those mistakes. And the thing that also helped them is that they didn't turn the football over. And that's where that turnover differential comes into play. They forced the turnovers, but not only did they force them, they did not give the football back. They took those turnovers, turned them into points. And when they had the football themselves, they were extremely stingy with it, not giving it away to the opposing defense. And so the Redskins did themselves some good. Even though that defense, passing-wise, was very shoddy, they did themselves some good. They did themselves a huge solid by not turning the football over and by forcing turnovers on the defensive side of the football. So you look at those interceptions. Look, 3rd in the league with 21 interceptions. That's a huge number, especially for a team that used to not force turnovers via interception. A huge number for the Redskins. They were very opportunistic on the defensive side of the football, and it paid off for them in the 2012 season in the form of, again, that NFC East championship. A lot of these games that were very close were decided because of turnovers, and the Redskins took advantage of them, and they won football games. So huge number for the Redskins. You look at 5th in rush defense. The Redskins were so bad defensively through the air that Again, in order to offset how bad they were as a defense, they had to be good at something. And they were good at rush defense. And it does help when the other team comes into the game thinking that we need to throw the ball on this team because they can't stop the pass. So it definitely helps that the other team comes into the game with the game plan of, hey, let's run a little bit, but let's pass the ball on these guys. They can't stop the pass. So that definitely helps the run defense, but the Redskins were actually a very good run defense team. They stopped the run. They were stout against the run. They were one of those teams that it was very hard to run the football against. And so from that standpoint, the Redskins' fifth in rush defense really helped out this defense, took pressure off of this passing defense that was extremely, extremely bad. And so the Redskins, being able to stop the run, was able to put a Band-Aid of sorts on this defense and not allowing this defense to just be totally a train wreck in terms of not being able to stop the run or the pass. Rush defense stepped up for the Redskins in 2012, and that's a strength that they definitely want to carry over to 2013. You look at weaknesses now for this Redskins team, and if you're a Redskins fan, then you know that the biggest weakness of this team was the safety position in 2012, and it's still a question mark going into 2013. Madu Williams was absolutely, unequivocally the worst safety in all of the National Football League last season. And now, stats may not back that up, but if you're a Redskins fan, no one will be able to tell you otherwise. And so the safety position was just an absolute nightmare, an abject disaster for the Redskins in 2012. You look at that Giants game, the first one in Giants Stadium, and how the Redskins lost that football game. It was the safety position. You look at a lot of the Redskins' struggles early on in the regular season, and it was the safety position. And look, the cornerbacks aren't absolved of all wrongdoing in this equation. They'll be talked about here in a second, but the safety position was one that you couldn't afford to make a mistake at the cornerback position. Look, corners get beat all the time in this league, but that's the job of the safety, especially if you're playing a defense where the safety is supposed to be over the top. It's the job of the safety to make sure that, hey, nothing gets behind me. You know, nothing cheap, nothing deep. Well, in Washington, everything was cheap, everything was deep, because the safety position was a mess. So that was definitely a weakness for the Washington Redskins. Pass defense, or lack thereof, was another weakness for this Redskins team. And when you look at this Redskins defense and how bad it was, I could sit here and tell you 31st worst pass defense, but I don't think that would actually do it any justice. I don't think you would really get the mental picture of how bad this team was defensively against the pass. So I'll show you with these visuals. I really don't know what else to say. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. Maybe being 32nd and dead last is worse, I guess, but they were close. They gave it a run. And so, I mean, I don't know what you want me to say. This team was historically bad. I mean, I know you just saw the graphic. One of the worst pass defenses in NFL history. I mean, what do you do with that? How do you even make it to 10-6 and win the division with that kind of passing defense? It's hard to fathom, but that's the importance of turnovers. The Redskins were able to force them and not give it back themselves. And so they were able to offset this historically bad passing defense. Sixth worst pass defense in NFL history. Boy, do you have to be bad to do that. So you move on to the next weakness. 32 sacks. And, I mean, You got to be better than that. And 32 sacks isn't a horrendous number, but in the grand scheme of things, when you have guys that you feel like can get to the quarterback, 32 sacks just isn't going to get it done. And yes, Brian Orakpo not playing is huge. You could put him back in the lineup, and you would probably be inserting another 8 to 9 sacks on this total, which would put the Redskins where they were a season ago at 43, which is probably where they should be. And so, yeah, that makes a huge difference. You take Adam Carricker out of the lineup, and he was a guy that the previous year had 5 sacks. So you're taking guys out of the lineup that can get to the quarterback as well. So, yes, this sack total was skewed, but 32 sacks isn't going to get it done. 32 sacks is 32 sacks, and 32 sacks isn't enough in the National Football League. And so that was definitely a weakness because this passing defense was so bad. The way to alleviate some of that pressure is to actually get pressure on the quarterback, and the Redskins simply did not do that enough in 2012, and so that was definitely a weakness of this football team. You look at offensive penalty woes, and earlier I talked about chunk plays and being able to overcome the opportunities to commit penalties, because if you get chunk plays, you shorten the field and you limit the amount of opportunities that you have to commit penalties. Well, that didn't matter for the Redskins. The reason why they had to get chunk plays is because they were always finding themselves in first or second and long because of offensive penalties. This was not a disciplined offense in terms of penalties. They were disciplined in terms of taking care of the football. But in terms of penalties, Redskins were 4th in the league in offensive penalties and 3rd in the league in offensive penalty yardage. And so, look, normally when you do that and you don't play good pass defense, it's normally a bad omen. But once again, I can't stress this enough. The turnover for a lot of teams can be the great equalizer. And in the Redskins' case, turnovers were more than the great equalizer. They were the great overcomer, because without these turnovers, the Redskins don't overcome all of these penalties. The Redskins don't overcome that horrendous pass defense. The Redskins don't overcome a lot of these deficiencies to win this division without the turnovers that they were able to force, and also the turnovers that they did not give back by taking care of the football themselves. So they were bad offensively in terms of penalties. Luckily enough for them, this offense was explosive enough to overcome those mistakes. But offensive penalty woes can't be a trend for the Redskins in 2013. That's something they must clean up. You look at the final weakness of this team, 28th overall in total defense. And the pass defense was the main problem here. I talked about it already. The rush defense was extremely good. The pass defense was that much worse. And so you put the two together and you get 28th in total defense. And so that's something the Redskins are going to have to clean up, because you can't continuously give up passing yards and think that you're going to win. The Redskins can't go into 2013 assuming that they're going to force 35 turnovers and they're only going to give the football back to the opposing team 14 times. They can't assume that they're going to be that careful with the football. And so they have to be able to be better on the defensive side of the football. So we move on from weaknesses to now camp battles in Washington. And this is a team that they have several positions up for grabs. The good part about this team is that there's a lot of continuity with the players. A lot of starters are returning. A lot of guys on this roster are returning. Redskins did a great job in the offseason of bringing back a lot of their players. And so a lot of continuity here, but still have a question at the right tackle position. That's a definite. And right now, the incumbent starter and the guy in the driver's seat, and I don't see him being unseated, is Tyler Polumbus. And look, I was singing his praises in the offseason. I said, look, we can't do better with the financial strap that the NFL has put on us for cash with those penalties. And we didn't have any money to go out and address the right tackle position. And so you stick with what you know. Look, he got us to the show. He was one of those offensive linemen last year that did his job and did it well enough so that the Redskins could have a 1,600-yard rusher, could have a quarterback that rushed for over 800 yards, could have an offense that was number one in the league in rushing and fifth overall. And so he was part of the reason why the Redskins were successful offensively. And so I said, look, if you can't find a better option, why not bring the man back and have him continue to have this offensive line be a cohesive unit? And so that's what the Redskins did. And I don't see any of the two backups that the Redskins brought in to challenge for this position, that being Tony Pachos, a guy that didn't even play football last season, dealt with some foot and ankle and knee problems and had surgery to repair his foot, and he didn't play in 2012. And so he was brought onto this roster, as well as Jeremy Trueblood, a guy that to me has been a historically bad tackle over in Tampa Bay for many years, and so he's over here as well. And I can't see either one of those guys taking the spot of Tyler Columbus in this offseason. And so I think Tyler Columbus is safe, and he will be your starter at the right tackle position. But it is definitely one that you wanted to keep an eye on, because Tyler Columbus is not great, but he's the best that the Redskins have to offer at the right tackle position. You look at safety, and of course, safety is a huge, huge problem for the Redskins. And both positions were up for grabs coming into this offseason, because Brandon Merriweather wasn't able to stay healthy at one safety position. So you look at the strong safety position, and Merriweather simply hasn't been able to stay healthy. And if he's healthy, he's the starter, but he's not. And Redskins don't really know when he'll be back. They think he'll be back for the opener. They're not sure. So Reed Doughty, trusty, handy, dandy Reed Doughty. Look, Redskins fans are good for crucifying this guy, and I don't know why, because all he's ever done is exactly what the Redskins have asked of him. And sure, he's not the most athletically gifted guy. Sure, he's not great in pass coverage. But don't put Reed Doughty in situations where he has to be the last man in pass coverage. Don't put him in situations like that. He shouldn't be in cover two coverage trying to guard Calvin Johnson, trying to guard Andre Johnson. He shouldn't be asked to do that. You put him in the box, in the run game, where he excels, and you'll get the best out of Reed Doughty. And so right now, he's the guy that's probably going to start if Brandon Merriweather can't go. So that's a little battle there, even though it's not much of a battle. It's more of, by default, Reed Doughty might have to start. You look at the free safety position, and that was definitely a battle coming into camp. Redskins had several different guys that they felt could play the free safety position. Anybody but Madu Williams is what the Redskins essentially were saying at that free safety spot. And so you look at the safety position and the free safety position specifically. Bakari Rambo, 6th-round rookie draft pick out of Georgia, is the guy that's in the driver's seat right now. And he looks like your starter day one. He's in competition with Dejon Gomes, Jordan Pugh, and a couple of other guys. But at the end of the day, Bakari Rambo seems to have this thing locked up. And it's all but a formality now. I think he's going to be your starter at the free safety position for the Washington Redskins. But again, that was definitely a battle worth watching early on in camp. You look at another battle, and it's for backup running back. And this one looks to be all but decided as well. And the Redskins last year leaned heavily on Alfred Morris, something that they cannot afford to do again in 2013. He had 330 carries last year. If you want to run a running back into the ground, the quickest way to do so is to hand him the football over 300 times repeatedly. You'll take 2 years off of his career every year you do that. So instead of him having one season, Alfred Morris has already had 2 years in the league because he had over 300 carries. You can't take that kind of punishment consistently as a back and think that you're going to last very long in this league. And so to take some of that pressure off of him, the Redskins need a backup running back, one that they can count on, one that they can trust, one that brings something extra to the offense. And I think that guy right now is Roy Halou Jr. He's going to be the backup. He was in a battle with incumbent backup from a season ago, Evan Royster, but Evan Royster simply doesn't bring anything different to the ball game, whereas Roy Halou brings an element of speed, the ability to catch it out of the backfield, and he can pass protect a little bit better than Evan Royster as well. So Roy Halou Jr. to me has this thing locked up at the backup running back position, and those are your camp battles. We go from there to the rookie watch for the Washington Redskins. And you look at these rookies, and you start with second-round pick Redskins, of course, did not have a first-round selection via the Robert Griffin III trade 2 seasons ago. So you look at their second-round pick, cornerback David Amerson out of NC State. He's a guy that has started for the majority of the preseason. A couple of injuries at the cornerback positions allowed him to start. He's not going to start as a cornerback on the outside, but he's going to play a heck of a lot. Outside in the slot, he's going to be moved around. They're going to blitz him. He's a guy that the Redskins really like and are going to be counting on here in the future, because they have a couple of guys with some contractual situations coming up that they're probably not going to bring back, or they're going to look to bring back in a lesser capacity. He's going to be a guy that they're going to look to start, and he's going to be one of the focuses of this secondary for the future. And so David Amerson is going to be huge in the 2013 season and moving forward. And so looking for big things from David Amerson. You look at third-round selection, tight end Jordan Reed out of Florida. Here's a guy that, for many, he was overkill. He wasn't necessary. The Redskins already have a plethora of tight ends. You look at the Redskins roster with the tight ends, and they got Fred Davis. They didn't know if he was going to be back or not, but they got Fred Davis. And he's only on a 1-year deal, so you don't know if he'll be back any longer after the 2013 season. But you still got him, you still got Niles Paul, and you still got Logan Paulson. So you say, hey, you got 3 tight ends. What do you need a 4th one for? Mike Shanahan, he just wants good football players. You take the best player available. To him, Jordan Reed was that, and he's going to play this year, and he's going to be effective. He's looked good in the preseason. If he can just stay healthy, Jordan Reed will definitely be a great acquisition to this football team. You look at 4th-round pick, safety Phillip Thomas out of Fresno State. He was supposed to be one of these young safeties that the Redskins drafted. They drafted 2 of them that was going to have an impact on that safety position, one that was dreadful a season ago. Unfortunately for the 4th-round selection out of Fresno State, Phillip Thomas has a Liz Frank injury, and he's going to miss the entire 2013 season with that foot injury that he suffered in the opening preseason game versus the Tennessee Titans. So that's a devastating blow to this secondary. But next man up, and it's tough, but we'll see what Phillip Thomas can do next season, as he will no longer be able to perform in the 2013 season. You look at the 5th-round picks that the Redskins had, and they had 2 of them, both out of Florida State University. First up, running back Chris Thompson. Second up, Brandon Jenkins, a defensive end that the Redskins are converting to outside linebacker. Both of these guys are going to make the roster. Both of these guys are going to contribute in huge ways. Chris Thompson is a guy now with an injury to Richard Crawford, who injured himself in the 3rd preseason game and is out for the season with a torn LCL. He's going to have to probably triple as a guy that can run it out of the backfield on 3rd downs, a guy that can catch it out of the backfield, but more importantly, he's going to have to be featured on special teams now. Richard Crawford was the Redskins punt returner. I think Chris Thompson is a guy that showed in that 3rd preseason game that, hey, I can do that as well. And so he'll probably be returning punts, and he'll be probably returning kickoffs as well. So I think Chris Thompson is a guy that you'll definitely see on this football team, and he'll be around in 2013. You also look at Brandon Jenkins. He's a guy that the Redskins are very high on. They want to get him on the field, and they have certain packages where they put him, Brian Orakpo, Ryan Kerrigan, and they may even sneak Rob Jackson into the game as well, all in the same package. And so Redskins fans were very eager to see what that will look like. But they've already unveiled it to a certain extent in this preseason, and it's looked very good. And Brandon Jenkins looks very good as well as an outside rushing linebacker. So he'll definitely be on this roster as well. And they look for him and Chris Thompson to have an impact on this football team. You look at 6th-round pick, safety Bakari Rambo. Again, talked about him. He's going to start at that free safety position, and the Redskins are hoping that there's a small learning curve for him and that he can come on to the scene and really help upgrade a position that was one of the worst in the National Football League. And so he's definitely a guy the Redskins will be counting on in 2013 in safety Bakari Rambo. 7th-round selection, running back Jawan Jamison out of Rutgers. Really don't see him making this roster at all. Don't think he has a shot. Don't know if the Redskins like him enough to stash him on the practice squad. We'll see. Only time will tell if he'll be on this practice squad. If he does not make the practice squad, then he will not be on this football team because he will not make the 53-man roster. And so that's the rookie watch. We move on to the best part of lab reports. Of course, I'm talking about the lab experiment. And so I entitled this one, Braves on the Warpath. And last year, the Redskins were exactly that. They were able to overcome a 3-6 start to reel off 7 consecutive victories en route to an NFC East championship. Now, can they continue to be Braves on the warpath? Now, that warpath doesn't need to stop at the postseason. It needs to get past the first round and into later rounds in the postseason and even to the Super Bowl. Mike Shanahan came out recently and said, hey, this is a Super Bowl or bust type of season. And so the Redskins feel like they've gotten to the point now where they feel like they're contenders for a Super Bowl championship and they are ready to win. And so they will be Braves on the warpath. So let's get to the research question. Is Robert Griffin III healthy enough to help the Redskins deal with the success of winning the division? And can this team show that they have staying power as one of the NFC's best? Look, if you want to prove to everyone that you're not just some flash in the pan outfit that just showed up one year, snuck up on some teams and won some football games, and you got to go out and show that you're consistently one of the better teams in the league. The Packers do it all the time. The Ravens do it all the time. The Patriots do it all the time. These are teams that you can go ahead and pencil in as playoff teams before the season starts. The Redskins want to throw their name into the hat as one of those teams as well. It's going to take a lot of work because it's hard to make the playoffs from one season to the next. We all know about the turnover that occurs in the NFL playoffs each and every season. 6 teams are coming out and another 6 teams are going in and year out. They want to make sure that they're not one of those teams that doesn't repeat as a playoff participant. They want to become a triple P. And for those of you who don't know what a triple P is, I will take you to my thesaurus and tell you that a triple P is a perennial playoff participant. And so, look, they want to become a triple P. And the only way to do that is to continue to be successful and win football games and get back to the postseason. They want to be the Falcons. They want to be the Packers. They want to be the Ravens. They want to be the Patriots. Well, you got to start winning, and you got to start winning now, and the Redskins have an opportunity to do that. Let's look at the hypothesis. If Robert Griffin III is healthy and able to somewhat duplicate his rookie season success, and this defense can continue to improve and force turnovers, then the Redskins can repeat as NFC East champions and begin to eye the Lombardi. Look, it's no secret the Redskins' success hinges upon the health of Robert Griffin III and his ability to continue to grow as a quarterback. Last year, he had a phenomenal season, and probably one of the most eye-popping stats that he had was the fact that he only threw 5 interceptions. He took care of the football in more ways than I could explain to you. When you don't turn the football over, you give yourself a chance. And it's hard to fathom a rookie only throwing 5 interceptions, but that's exactly what Robert Griffin III did. And so if he can find a way to take care of the ball like he did last season, throw 20 touchdowns, and he's looking to improve upon that total, he's going to be one of the elite quarterbacks in the league because only elite quarterbacks have a 4-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. You don't see many rookies doing that. You don't see many veterans doing that. I mean, only the elite of the elites do that. Most guys that are good quarterbacks that are elite in this league still turn it over. Eli Manning still turns the football over. Drew Brees still turns the football over. They're gunslingers. They try to fit it in. They make mistakes. Robert Griffin III didn't do that. He was on a Brady-esque, a Rodgers-esque type pace last season. Guys who throw single digits in interceptions. If he can continue to do that, continue to manage this offense and make this Redskins offense explosive, this Redskins team has the ability to do some big things. Also, though, this defense has to get better. I can't state that enough. They can't post the numbers that they did defensively again if they want to win. And it'd be nice if they could force those turnovers like they did a season ago. You look at materials needed for the Redskins in 2013. Encore. You definitely. Do you want an encore? Do you want more? Yeah, you want more if you're a Redskins fan. It's encore. You want the same thing from Robert Griffin III. You want the same thing from Alfred Morris. You want this Redskins defense to be opportunistic and forcing turnovers. No, you don't want the safety position in the secondary to be a train wreck. But for the Redskins, you want an encore. You want to win the NFC East. You want this offense to be explosive. You want to have a really good rush defense. You want an encore if you're a Redskins fan. You look at turn it up. And look, the Redskins forced turnovers last year. Turn it up. Continue to force turnovers. If you're the Redskins, hey, 35 takeaways is huge. And another number that was huge was the 14 giveaways. When you have a plus 21 turnover ratio, you're doing something right. And the Redskins did something right in 2012. They want to continue to force those turnovers. Shu Madu and Madiu Williams is no longer on this roster. And that in itself elevates the Redskins in their pass defense efforts. Shu Madu and Madiu Williams was absolutely a mess last year. And my thing with him was he was always late to the party. And when you show up late and you don't have the things that you need, it just makes the problem that much worse. And Madiu Williams last year made the problem worse in Washington. And him not being on the roster helps this team tremendously. Big boy football. Look, the Redskins, they're now one of the good teams in the league, or at least they're perceived to be one of the good teams in the league. And when you are a champion of your division, guess what? You get a champion's schedule. No, you don't get to play the St. Louis Rams. You don't get to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You don't get to play the teams that were the bottom feeders in their divisions the year before. You don't get to play teams that weren't good a season ago. You don't get to play the Panthers. You don't get to play teams that you think that you might have a shot to beat. You don't get to play those teams. You get to play the first place teams when you win a division. So you don't get the last place team. You don't get Carolina. You get Atlanta. You don't get the Rams or the Cardinals this time around. You get the 49ers. And so you don't get to bypass the good teams in the league and find that backdoor entrance into the postseason. You got to play the big boys. And if you want to repeat as NFC East champions, you got to beat the big boys in the league. You got to beat the 49ers. You got to beat the Falcons. You got to play the Broncos. You got to play the Packers, the Bears. You got to play all the good teams. So what are you going to do now that it's big boy football time? Are you going to pull those britches up, tighten those bootstraps, and get it done? Or are you going to succumb to the pressure that is big boy football? We will see. Silver secondary. And look, I'm not asking this secondary to be platinum. Hell, I'm not even asking for them to be gold. I just want them to be silver. Me and my buddies, we used to play a lot of games when I was a kid. And one of the games we used to play was Mario Kart. And we used to have a blast doing it. And it was 4 of us. And as you know, there's only 3 cups that you can win. A bronze, a silver, and a gold. And every time there was someone that wasn't going to win, that wasn't going to get on that podium and get a cup. And you know what that person received when they didn't win, when you didn't get one of the cups? We called it the piss cup. And last year, this Redskins defense, or this secondary, mind you, they received the piss cup because they didn't place. They didn't get a bronze. They didn't get a silver. They didn't get a gold or platinum medal. They got the piss cup. And that's what you get when you lose. And this secondary continuously lost last season. Well, I'm asking this secondary this year to be a silver secondary, not a bronze. Definitely don't want to have that piss cup again. Looking for this secondary to be a silver secondary. I'm not asking for you to be gold. I'm not asking for a platinum medal here. I just want you to be silver. If you can be silver, and force turnovers. And this offense can be 2/3 of what it was last season. The Redskins will win football games. Pass rush power. And essentially that's what the Redskins are looking for. Pass rush power. If they can get pass rush from this football team, if Kerrigan can continue to get better, and we see the flashes in this preseason. He looks like he's ready to get double-digit sacks. If Arakpo can stay healthy and provide double-digit sacks. If Stephen Bowen can get back to his ways getting to the quarterback. If the Redskins can blitz and apply more pressure, Brandon Jenkins and Rob Jackson can provide extra pressure on the edges. Darryl Tapp. If we can find ways to get to the quarterback, this is going to be a dangerous team. And that will also take some of the pressure off of this secondary. Pass rush power for the Redskins will be key in 2013. You look at data. And these are the things that I think are needed for the Redskins to be successful in 2013. Robert Griffin III, 3,300 to 3,750 passing yards, 25 to 28 touchdowns, 8 to 11 interceptions, 65% completion percentage, 470 to 590 rushing yards, 6 to 8 rushing touchdowns. Look, if you think that Robert Griffin III isn't going to still run read option, you're sadly mistaken and you're wrong. He's still going to run the football. The Redskins just simply need to pick their spots on when they ask him to run the football, and he has to do a better job of protecting himself. Slide, dive, get out of bounds. Whatever you got to do to not take an unnecessary shot, that's what he needs to do. I think he understands what he has to do to preserve his body, and so he's going to run the football. Those are the numbers I'm looking for from Robert Griffin III. Pierre Garçon, 72 to 79 catches, 1,100 receiving yards, 5 to 8 touchdowns. Here's a guy that has never had over 1,000 yards receiving in his career. If he can stay healthy, I don't see why Pierre Garçon can't get over 1,000 yards receiving. This guy is dynamic. He's a playmaker. He makes things happen, blazing speed, and he has the ability to be a game breaker, a game changer. And so I see this guy getting over 1,000 yards if he can stay healthy. Fred Davis, Freddie D, 63 to 68 catches, 780 to 875 receiving yards, 4 to 7 touchdowns. Look, if he's healthy, and he's a difference maker. He can stretch the defense. He can make things happen. I expect Fred Davis to do some big things this year. Alfred Morris, 265 to 285 carries for 1,100 to 1,250 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. Look, you see how I scaled back those carries? You see how that number came down drastically from 330 to a maximum of 285 and a minimum of 265? That's what the Redskins need to be thinking as a game plan for this guy going into the season. Let's not have this guy be a personal battering ram that carries the football 305. I don't even want this guy exceeding 290 carries, let alone 300. Scale him back, and this is the reason why they should be able to do that. Roy Halou Jr., 90 to 135 carries, 650 to 825 rushing yards, 250 to 380 receiving yards, and 4 to 6 total touchdowns. That's the reason why Alfred Morris should be able to not carry the ball 300 times, because he'll have help in the form of Roy Halou Jr. this season. If he can stay healthy, he will be a huge asset to this Redskins offense. Skins D, forced 30 to 34 turnovers, achieved 39 to 44 sacks, give up 21.9 points per game, and 8 to 11 plays of over 40 yards given up. Look, the Redskins gave up way more than 21 points a game last season, and they got to bring that number down. They don't want to find themselves in shootouts, especially with the teams they're playing this year. Last year, it was okay to get in a few shootouts because you weren't playing highly explosive and flammable offenses. That's not the case this year. All of these teams that we're playing have a label on them that says highly flammable and explosive, very dangerous and corrosive. We don't want to get into shootout with these explosive teams. We don't want to get into a shootout with the Falcons. We don't want to get into a shootout with the 49ers. We don't want to get into a shootout with the Packers, nor the Bears. We don't want to get into shootouts with teams that can score points. Maybe not the Bears. They don't scare me offensively. But I don't want to get into a shootout with the Giants, with the Packers. I don't want to get into a shootout with the Falcons. I don't want to get into a shootout with the Broncos. It's not necessary. Those aren't games that you'll win 9 times out of 10 if you want to get into shootouts with high-powered offenses. And so, hey, need to play some defense, need to limit the opponent from scoring a lot of points. And if they can do that and force turnovers and do all the things that I just mentioned, this will be a hard team to beat in 2013. So we get to the independent variable. Defensively, the Redskins were porous last season, but they had the great equalizer on their side as they were able to force enough turnovers to carry them until they were actually a whole competent defense later on in the end of the season. The secondary finally caught up with the rush defense, and this team actually didn't look half bad on the defensive side of the football. This season, the Redskins will need to be better at getting after the quarterback and better in coverage. And it wouldn't hurt to keep the turnovers coming, but don't rely on that. Be better in the secondary. That's going to be your independent variable. Be better in the secondary. Have to be better in pass defense. If they can do that and continue all of the things that they did a season ago, man, this team is going to be very dangerous. You look at dependent variable. And look, the dependent variable is simply Robert Griffin III. This Redskins football team depends on the health. It hinges upon the health of Robert Griffin III. If he's healthy, if he's the guy he was last year, we're going to be a hard team to beat. If he's not, then the Redskins are simply going to be a shell of themselves from a year ago. And so Robert Griffin III, without a doubt, your dependent variable. Constant, Mike Shanahan and Bruce Allen. Ever since these two have come on board, this Redskins ship has been turned around. When they got here, this was a team that was in the dumps. And there was no fixing this team until they got here. This Redskins team was mismanaged. They were in the negative in the books. The salary cap was a mess. The roster was even worse. And the Redskins just weren't a good football team. They were one of those teams that had become the laughing stock of the National Football League. The Jim Zorn era, and you just look at how this team was ran top to bottom. The owner was a bit meddlesome at times, and Daniel Snyder, Vinny Serrato and company were just running this thing into the ground. Exit those guys stage left, and enter in Bruce Allen as the GM and Mike Shanahan as the head coach and the executive decision maker. And all of a sudden, this team is now a viable option as a Super Bowl candidate. And from that first year that Mike Shanahan and Bruce Allen took over to now, tremendous change in 4 years. And really 3, because in their third season, they were able to win the division and make it to the postseason. And so those guys are the constant right now for this Washington Redskins organization. Without them, who knows where this Redskins team would be in 2013. You look at the conclusion. Simply put, this is a huge year for the Redskins as an organization. This is the season where the Redskins both turn the proverbial corner and become elite, and more importantly, a consistent winner with a serious shot at winning it all, or they could fall back to the pack and become just another team in the NFL mediocrity pot, looking to feed off the table scraps left by the big boys in the NFL. And so I don't think that's what the Redskins are going to do. They're not going to be on the side of the table waiting for table scraps to fall off because the big boys are eating at the table. The Redskins are ready to take their seat at that big boy table and eat and rub elbows with the NFL's best. And so I think it's time for the Redskins to take their place at the big boy table and eat from the breakfast of champions. 10-6 NFC East champions once again. Now, if the Redskins don't take care of business within the division, then that 10-6 mark will only be good for a wild card berth. But if they take care of interdivisional games like they did a season ago, they will be NFC East champions. If this team is 3-3 in the division, 10-6 isn't going to win you the division, because that would mean someone else in the division is 4-2 or 5-1 like the Redskins were a season ago. The Redskins need to be 5-1 or 6-0 in this division to win this NFC East crown once again. And so if they are that, which I think they will be, then they'll win this division. If not, then the Giants, I think, will be your NFC East champions. But either way, this Redskins team is ready to take that next step. And so 10-6 NFC East champions is what I see from this Washington Redskins team. Join me next time when we'll be talking AFC East football, and we'll start out with the Buffalo Bills. See you next time here on the Lab Reports.